The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was a masterpiece of alien architecture, a sprawling dome of shimmering light and gravitic engineering, designed to make every being within feel small in the face of authority. Representatives of over 100 species sat in their respective sections, their gazes locked onto the lone human standing before the tribunal. Ambassador Draven Holt, dressed in the regal blue and silver of the Terran diplomatic corps, stared back, his expression unreadable. At the center of the chamber, High Arbiter Xela of the Vorthan Imperium raised her hand, signaling for silence. The murmurs that had rippled through the assembly died instantly. Her 6 golden eyes gleamed with what might have been satisfaction. After extensive deliberation, the Galactic Council has reached its verdict. Xela declared, her voice amplified across the hall. Humanity, having demonstrated unchecked aggression, technological unpredictability, and a blatant disregard for the stability of the interstellar community, is hereby deemed a destabilizing force. The proclamation sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. Some species nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably. The council had judged species before, but never one so young, never one so capable. Draven Holt stood rigid, his jaw tightening as Xela continued. Effective immediately, all human military operations are to cease. The Sol Defense Fleet is to be dismantled. Terran colonies beyond the Sol system will fall under council oversight, and Earth will submit to the authority of a governing council to ensure compliance with interstellar law. The room remained silent for a moment, then erupted into a cacophony of voices. Some delegates cheered the decision, particularly the reptilian Drekker and the insectoid Kryn, both of whom had suffered humiliating defeats in past conflicts against humanity. Others exchanged uneasy glances, their mandibles clicking or bioluminescent skin pulsing in uncertainty. The humans had not been the first species to challenge council authority, but if they resisted, they could be the last. Draven let the storm of voices wash over him, his expression carefully schooled. He had expected this. What he had not expected was the smugness in that Selfar Dominion's delegation, humanity's supposed allies. The sleek, violet-skinned humanoids sat still, their leader, Ambassador Xin Varek, watching with an eerie calm. Traitors, Draven thought, but he said nothing. Instead, he took a deep breath and stepped forward. If I may speak. The chamber hushed. Xela hesitated, but finally nodded. You may. Draven's voice remained steady, though every word was weighted with controlled fury. The council claims this is about peace, but we all know what this really is. His gaze swept across the chamber. Fear. A murmur ran through the assembly. You fear us because we do not fit into the order you created, because we are adaptable, because we refuse to be controlled. His voice darkened. And because every time you have tested us, we have survived. Silence followed. Xela's eyes narrowed. Choose your next words carefully, Ambassador. Draven smiled. A quiet, knowing smile. It has already begun. Draven Holt walked out of the Galactic Council chamber with measured steps, his expression unreadable. Inside, he was seething. The verdict had been expected, but the sheer arrogance of the council still burned. Humanity had fought, bled, and earned its place among the stars, yet the so-called enlightened species of the galaxy had decided they were too dangerous to be free. Waiting for him outside the chamber was Admiral Elias Voss, a towering figure in his black Sol Defense Fleet uniform. His sharp eyes took in the ambassador's posture, and without a word, they walked down the polished corridors of the council spire. Their security escort, 2 human marines, followed at a respectful distance. The verdict? Voss asked, though he already knew the answer. As expected, Draven muttered, they want our fleets disbanded, our colonies controlled, and Earth under occupation. Voss let out a quiet breath, his expression grim. And the Xelfar. Draven's hands clenched into fists. They voted in favor of the sanctions. Xin Varek looked me in the eye, while they stripped our sovereignty away. The words carried the weight of betrayal, and for good reason. The Xelthar Dominion had been humanity's closest ally for nearly a century. Their sleek, violet-skinned diplomats had once stood beside humans in trade agreements and military coalitions. The Dominion had sworn to protect humanity's interests within the Council, and yet when the moment came, they had sided with the Council instead. They were the deciding vote. Draven continued, voice low. Without them, the Council wouldn't have had the majority. Voss exhaled through his nose, his fingers tapping against his belt. I warned the Senate about trusting them. The Xelthar only make alliances when it benefits them. He shook his head. What does the Senate want to do now? Roll over and hope they show mercy. Draven gave a hollow chuckle. Some of them, yes. Others are calling for negotiations. Negotiations, Voss scoffed. There is no negotiation. They just sentenced us. What do they expect? That we'll say thank you and hand over the keys to Sol? They expect compliance, Draven said darkly. They stopped at the docking platform, where a sleek human diplomatic vessel awaited them. Voss turned, his expression unreadable. And what do you expect, Draven? Draven looked at the stars above. In the distance, Council warships loomed over the capital planet like silent enforcers of fate. He thought of Earth, of the billions of humans who had built something greater than what the Council had ever expected. I expect, he said quietly, that they have no idea what they've just done. A sudden ping echoed in his earpiece. One of the Marines beside him stiffened as he listened to his own communicator. Then his face paled. Sir, the Marine said urgently, Titan Station just went dark. Draven and Voss exchanged a look. Titan Station was one of humanity's most important outposts in the Sol system. For it to go dark meant only one thing. The first strike had already begun. The command deck of the Resolute, the Sol Defense Fleet's flagship, was deathly silent as Admiral Elias Voss stared at the tactical display. The holographic map showed Titan Station, a vital orbital hub near Saturn, now marked by a pulsing red icon. No signals, no response, just silence. Commander Lynn Caldwell, his second in command, broke the stillness. Titan's defense grid was active less than an hour ago. Then nothing. No distress calls, no emergency beacons. It's as if the entire station just vanished. Voss exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. Do we have visual confirmation? Lynn nodded, bringing up a grainy feed from a long-range probe. The image flickered before stabilizing. Titan Station was still there, charred, lifeless, and surrounded by debris. Several Council warships hovered nearby, their sleek designs unmistakable. Draven Holt, who had arrived on the Resolute moments ago, leaned forward. His expression darkened as he studied the wreckage. That's not a battle, he said, voice tight. That's an execution. Lynn's fingers danced over the control panel, enhancing the footage. Energy signatures indicate heavy plasma bombardment. The station's shields held for a while, but they were eventually overwhelmed. They didn't just disable the station. They erased it. Voss's fingers curled into a fist. Thousands of civilians had lived on Titan Station. Scientists, engineers, families. The Council had claimed their mission was peaceful, that humanity only needed to be monitored. And yet, the first sign of defiance had been met with annihilation. A new message blinked onto the screen. A recorded transmission. The sender, Grand Marshal Rithos of the Galactic Council's peacekeeping forces. Play it, Voss ordered. The holographic image of Rithos, a towering reptilian Drekker with scarred emerald scales, flickered to life. His golden eyes were cold, calculating. The Galactic Council will not tolerate resistance. The destruction of Titan Station was an unfortunate consequence of human defiance. All Terran military assets are ordered to stand down immediately. Any further acts of aggression will be met with swift and decisive force. The message ended. Silence followed. Voss turned to Draven. This was deliberate. His voice was calm, but the steel behind it was unmistakable. They wanted to make an example of us, to show us what happens if we resist. Draven nodded grimly. Then they've made a mistake. Lynn looked between them. Sir, what are our orders? Voss straightened. He had served in the Sol Defense Fleet for decades, had fought battles against pirates, rogue factions, and even skirmishes with the Drekker, but never had he seen such a blatant act of violence disguised as diplomacy. His next words would define the future of humanity. He turned to his crew, his voice steady. Alert all forces. Titan Station was not an act of war. The officers stared at him, confused. Voss's gaze burned with resolve. War implies that both sides have a chance to negotiate. This? He gestured to the wreckage on the screen. This is survival. The Resolute burned through space, cutting a path toward the heart of the Sol system. The time for diplomacy had passed. Humanity had seen the Council's true colors. Their promise of peace was a lie, their justice nothing more than the illusion of control. Titan Station was gone, and with it, the last hope of avoiding war. Admiral Elias Voss stood at the command console, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the fleet status update on the holographic display. Every ship under human control was mobilizing. From Mars to Europa, from the asteroid colonies to the orbital docks above Earth, warships were departing from their berths, engines burning hot. Across the bridge, Commander Lynn Caldwell read off the incoming reports. The First and Second Fleet are fully operational. The Martian shipyards are scrambling to push out any vessel with a working engine and a gun. Civilian pilots are volunteering for armed escort duty. Even cargo haulers are retrofitting themselves with point defense turrets. She looked up, eyes gleaming with something fierce. Sir, they're calling it the RAF Protocol. Voss allowed himself a grim smile. Humanity had always been underestimated. Other species saw them as reckless, undisciplined. But humans had an ability no other species did. They adapted. They learned. And now, they were about to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Status on the enemy fleet? Voss asked. Draven Holt stepped forward, a data slate in hand. The Council forces are spread thin, still focusing on securing outlying human colonies. Their largest battle groups are stationed near Proxima and Alpha Centauri, expecting us to make a conventional defense. He glanced up, a knowing smirk on his lips. They're assuming we'll fight fair. Voss chuckled, low and dangerous. Then let's disappoint them. The first strike. Hours later, in the cold darkness of space, the first counterattack began. Council warships stationed at the Proxima relay station detected a disturbance, an odd energy fluctuation on their long-range sensors. The fleet's commander, an experienced Kryn tactician, ordered a scan. He never got the chance to read the results. From the void, 100 silent missiles emerged. They weren't standard warheads, no bright ion trails, no energy signatures, just cold, unpowered projectiles, launched at high velocity from stealth platforms. By the time the Council's automated defenses recognized the threat, it was too late. The first explosions rippled through the fleet. Ships buckled under the kinetic impact, their hulls shredded before their shields could even activate. Secondary detonations ruptured fuel reserves, turning the once dominant Council force into a drifting graveyard. The response. Panic spread through the Galactic Council's ranks. They had expected human resistance, but not like this. Not with such precision. Not with such devastating efficiency. For the first time, the Council's admirals began to wonder if they had made a mistake. Back on the Resolute, Voss watched the battle reports with satisfaction. Let the galaxy know, he said coldly. Humanity does not kneel. The war had begun in earnest. Humanity, backed into a corner, did not fight for conquest or glory. They fought to exist. And when a species fights for survival, it does not fight clean. Across the galaxy, Council fleets moved to enforce their rule, but everywhere they went, they found not submission, but resistance. Humanity had vanished from the conventional battlefield, refusing to engage in the open wars the Council had prepared for. Instead, they struck in the shadows, in the cracks between worlds, in the spaces where the Council had never thought to look. The Silent Front. In the Persei sector, a Kryn battleship, Talvareth, was escorting a fleet of supply carriers when its engines suddenly died. Communications flickered. Moments later, alarms blared as their long-range scanners showed dozens of human ships, except they weren't warships. They were cargo freighters, civilian vessels. The Kryn commander sneered, assuming an easy victory. That was before the freighters detonated. Hidden among their hulls were electromagnetic pulse charges and high-yield explosives. The shockwave crippled the entire fleet before humanity's real forces emerged, silent, agile warships, painted black to blend with the void. The Council ships, blinded and immobile, were nothing more than targets. The battle lasted 3 minutes. No survivors. The cyber offensive. While the Council tried to fight a conventional war, humanity waged another battle, one fought in data streams and code. The first sign of trouble came when a Council dreadnought, Judicator's Wrath, attempted to launch its fighter squadrons, only for its hangar bay doors to lock shut. Then, its main cannon turned, not toward enemy ships, but toward its own fleet. Before the crew could react, their own flagship had fired a devastating shot into their ranks. Human hackers had infiltrated their systems weeks before, lying in wait for the perfect moment to strike. Across the Council's armada, ships lost control of weapons, targeting systems, or even life support. Some captains were forced to abandon their ships entirely, knowing they had become traps instead of weapons. The Council had always relied on superior numbers. Now they couldn't even trust their own fleets. The grinding reality. Months passed, and the war stretched across systems. The Council, once confident of a swift victory, found itself bleeding resources at an alarming rate. Entire fleets were vanishing into the void. Supply lines were in ruins. And worse, other species were watching. The Tselfar Dominion, once among humanity's closest allies, had betrayed them at the Council tribunal. But now, they hesitated. They had expected humanity to crumble within weeks. Instead, the Council was losing ships faster than they could replace them. A Tselfar diplomat sent a private message to his superiors. "We made a mistake. Humanity is not dying. They are winning." Back on Earth, Admiral Elias Voss stood before a war room filled with human leaders, his expression hard. "They thought we would break," he said. "They thought we would kneel." His gaze swept across the room. They were wrong. The war was no longer just a conflict between the Galactic Council and humanity. It was a lesson in fear. Fear that had begun to spread among the Council's ruling species like an infection. What was once a display of absolute power had become a desperate struggle to contain a war spiraling out of control. Humanity had proven beyond doubt that they were not prey to be subdued, but predators lurking in the shadows, striking with ruthless precision. The Council's fleets were bleeding ships, their supply lines crumbling. Every time they thought they had contained the threat, human forces would slip past their defenses and strike elsewhere. And now, the cracks were beginning to show. A fractured alliance. In the heart of the Council's homeworld, the Grand Chamber was in chaos. The Drekker and Kryn factions, the most militaristic of the ruling species, demanded a full-scale extermination of humanity. No negotiations, no prisoners, but others were less certain. The Tselfar Dominion, the species that had once voted to strip humanity of its sovereignty, had begun to reconsider their decision. The Tselfar were manipulators, masters of strategy. When they had betrayed humanity, they believed it was the safest course of action, aligning with the Council to maintain their own power. But now, the Council was losing. Zin Varek, the Tselfar ambassador, stood at the center of the debate. "This war is no longer a matter of punishment," he said coldly. "It is a matter of survival. Humanity has fought the entire Council to a standstill, and if they have done this while fighting alone, what happens if others join them?" His words sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. The reality was undeniable. The other lesser species, the ones forced into submission by the Council long ago, were watching. The Nilari, the Vorthan, the Ticks, and dozens more had been under the Council's rule for centuries, never daring to rise against them. But now, they had seen what humanity was capable of. Now they saw something they had never seen before. A chance. A choice is made. While the Council debated, humanity moved forward, deep in the uncharted void, where no Council ship dared to follow. Admiral Elias Voss stood aboard the warship Resolute, watching as a transmission came through. The Xelthar Dominion had reached out. Draven Holt stood beside him, arms crossed. "They want a meeting," he said. "An unofficial one. They claim they want to negotiate peace." Voss scoffed. "Peace, or a way to save their own skin?" Draven smirked. "Does it matter? They wouldn't be coming to us if they thought we were weak. That means we have leverage." Voss considered this. Humanity had fought alone for long enough. But if the Xelthar truly were having second thoughts, he turned to Draven. "Set the meeting." The war wasn't over. But for the first time, it wasn't just humanity against the galaxy. For the first time, the Council itself was starting to fracture. The meeting took place in a concealed asteroid station, far from prying Council eyes. The Resolute remained in the shadows, its weapons primed, as Admiral Elias Voss and Draven Holt met with its Xelthar envoy. The Xelthar delegation was small, just 3 representatives, but their presence alone spoke volumes. They wouldn't have risked a meeting if they didn't see the writing on the wall. Zin Varek, the Xelthar ambassador who had once voted against humanity, sat across from them. His violet skin darkened in tension as he observed the 2 humans before him. One a decorated admiral, the other a diplomat whose voice had once carried weight in the Council chambers. Now they represented a force that had defied the galaxy itself. Draven spoke first. "You asked for this meeting. That means you have something to offer." Varek's elongated fingers drummed against the table before he exhaled slowly. "The Dominion made a miscalculation," he admitted. "We believed aligning with the Council was the safer path. We see now that we were mistaken." Voss folded his arms. "And?" Varek hesitated. "The Council is weakening. They will not admit it, but they cannot sustain this war much longer. Their supply lines are in disarray, their fleets stretched thin. And their allies? Many of them doubt. The Nilarian Ticks have already begun withdrawing forces from the war effort. Others will follow." Draven's eyes narrowed. "And what does the Dominion want?" Varek leaned forward. "An alliance." A tense silence followed. Humanity had no reason to trust them. The Xelthar had stood by as the Council tried to break them. But Voss knew war was not won by grudges. It was won by pragmatism. "You expect us to believe you?" Voss asked, his voice cold. Varek nodded. "I expect you to use us. The Council still believes we are loyal. That gives us access to their command networks, their battle plans. If we side with you, we can feed them false intelligence, sabotage their movements, and ensure their forces are where you want them to be." Draven exchanged a glance with Voss. The offer was tempting. Too tempting. "You betrayed us once," Voss said. "What stops you from doing it again?" Varek met his gaze, unflinching. "Survival. If humanity wins this war, the Council will fall. And when that happens, the Xelthar Dominion would rather be standing beside you than against you." Voss stared at the Xelthar for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Then welcome to the Resistance." The next step. The moment the agreement was sealed, plans were set in motion. False intelligence was leaked, drawing the Council's fleets into traps instead of battles. Supply depots mysteriously lost their shipments. Key commanders were fed misinformation, sending their forces into dead zones where humanity's ambush teams awaited. For the first time, the war was no longer a desperate struggle. For the first time, humanity was on the offensive. The war had reached its final act. With the Xelthar Dominion feeding false intelligence into the Council's network, humanity struck like never before. Council fleets, once overwhelming in numbers and firepower, found themselves lured into ambushes, stranded without reinforcements, and cut off from supply lines. Ships that once patrolled the outer colonies with impunity were now hunted, isolated, and destroyed. But even with the tides turning, Admiral Elias Voss knew the war would only end with one decisive blow. The Council's core world, Elindra Prime, stood as the heart of their empire. It was there that the Grand Chamber ruled, where their fleets coordinated, and where the illusion of their power remained intact. And it was there that humanity would make its final stand. The final assault. The Resolute led the charge, flanked by an armada of human and Selfar warships. The plan was simple: strike hard, strike fast, and dismantle the Council's leadership before they could recover. The Council was waiting. As humanity's forces breached the outer defenses of Elindra Prime, the largest fleet the Council had ever assembled converged upon them. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Ships clashing in brutal close-range combat, kinetic weapons shredding through hulls, missiles carving through shields, and electronic warfare turning the battlefield into chaos. The Resolute weaved through the carnage, Voss at the helm, his crew working with relentless efficiency. Draven Holt stood beside him, reading reports as they came in. "Our forces are holding the line, but we need to hit their command center now before reinforcements arrive." Voss nodded. "Then we finish this." The Reckoning. Human strike teams landed on Elindra Prime, pushing through the Grand Chamber's defenses. The Elite Council soldiers fought bitterly, but they weren't prepared for what came next. The chamber doors burst open. Admiral Voss and Draven stepped inside, flanked by human operatives. The Council's leaders, once arrogant, untouchable, stood frozen in disbelief as the humans leveled their weapons. Zin Varric, standing at their side, smirked. "Your reign is over." Grand Marshal Rithos, the Drekker who had ordered the destruction of Titan Station, glared at them. "You don't understand what you've done," he snarled. "Without the Council, there will be chaos." Draven stepped forward, eyes cold. "Then let there be chaos." A single gunshot echoed through the chamber. A new dawn. With the Council's leadership dismantled, the war was over. One by one, species once bound under the Council's rule declared their independence. Some chose to ally with humanity. Others sought their own path. But one thing was clear: humanity had not just survived. They had changed the galaxy. On the bridge of the Resolute, Voss looked out into the void. The war had cost them dearly, but they had proven something undeniable. Humanity did not bow. Humanity endured. And now, the stars belonged to them.